I'm 62 years old, a widow and a mother of two. And tonight, I'm wearing the same burgundy dress I once wore to my daughter's high school graduation, her college commencement, and her first promotion party. Rachel used to call it elegant, said I looked like someone who belonged in a magazine. Now, as I smooth it over my hips in the mirror, I wonder if tonight will be the last time I ever dress up for her. 3 weeks ago we had an argument, not a disagreement. A full, knock the air out of you fight about her wedding. Rachel and her fiancé Carter wanted me to contribute $65,000. Not asked, demanded. As if the life insurance money from my late husband, the money I had saved and preserved for my retirement, was theirs by blood. "Mom, you're being selfish," Rachel had said, her voice cold, like wind whipping through a broken window. "You're sitting on money while we're trying to start our lives. Don't you want me to be happy?" I told her happiness didn't require imported marble, private chefs, or a honeymoon on a remote island. I offered $15,000, enough for a beautiful ceremony, local, meaningful. But Rachel looked at me like I had just insulted her soul, like I was holding her hostage with my limitations. It was a look that stayed with me, a look that replaced years of dandelions, glitter glue, and handmade cards that said things like, "Mom, you're my hero." Then last Tuesday, my phone rang while I was trimming lavender in my backyard. Rachel's voice was softer this time, different. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we were both stubborn. Can we talk? Over dinner?" My heart jumped before I could stop it. Maybe, I thought, just maybe the silence had made her reflect. Maybe being 3 months pregnant had opened her eyes to the weight of sacrifice. I said yes before I finished exhaling, already planning what meal I'd cook, what stories I'd tell, what bridges we'd rebuild. "Actually, Carter and I want to take you out," she added. "That nice Italian place on Meridian Street, Franco's, where Harold and I had celebrated our 25th anniversary. Where the wine was good, the lights were low, and the food reminded me of simpler love." As I drove to the restaurant, I passed the school where I'd volunteered in the library, the park where I pushed Rachel on swings until my arms ached, the community center where I'd taught her to waltz for her first dance. Every landmark whispered, "You were there." Franco's looked exactly as I remembered, window boxes spilling with mums, candlelight behind gauze curtains, and the scent of basil floating into the air like an old lullaby. I arrived at 6:30, exactly. Rachel always appreciated punctuality, just like her father. The hostess led me to a table where Rachel already sat. She looked radiant. Pregnancy glowed in her cheeks, her hair cascaded in soft curls, and she wore a designer dress that probably cost more than 2 months of groceries. "Mom," she said, standing to hug me. And for a moment, buried in her perfume, I felt the warm rush of being her mother again, the real her, the girl who once said she wanted to grow up and be like me. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I told her. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she smiled. "Second trimester is easier. Carter should be here any minute." He got held up. Carter. 36. Confident. A commercial real estate guy who always had a firm handshake and a glint in his eye that said, "What can you do for me?" I'd tried to like him, I really had, but there was something behind his charm that felt too slick, too interested. I'm glad you called," I said, sitting down. "I've missed you." Something flashed in Rachel's eyes. Regret? Guilt? But before I could ask, Carter arrived. Not alone. 3 men followed him, all in dark suits, all with briefcases. "Mrs. McKinney," Carter greeted me with a smile too polished, too rehearsed. "Thank you for joining us." The men pulled out chairs and sat around our small table, turning our intimate dinner into a conference meeting. I felt a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't spontaneous. This was orchestrated. "Rachel," I asked gently, "who are these gentlemen?" "Some colleagues of Carter's," she replied, avoiding my eyes. "They have some paperwork they'd like you to see." A silver-haired man leaned forward, smiling with the confidence of someone who wins by wearing you down. "Mrs. McKinney, I'm Richard Kirk, Carter's attorney. We've prepared a few documents we believe are in everyone's best interest." That tightness in my chest returned, sharper now. The same ache I felt when Rachel first demanded the money. "What kind of documents?" I asked, already knowing the answer. It's simple, Carter said. We'd like you to sign a power of attorney. To let us help you manage your finances. You're alone now, and at your age, it just makes sense. My age, I repeated slowly. Carter, I'm 62. Not ancient. Of course, he said, chuckling. But investments, real estate, these things can get complicated. You shouldn't have to worry. I turned to Rachel. Waited. Begged her silently to stop this. To say, Mom, I didn't know they'd do this. But she said nothing. Did nothing. The lawyer pushed a folder across the table. Sign here and here. Initial here. Simple. I opened it. There it was. All of it. Everything Harold and I had built. Every account, every asset, every ounce of effort we'd poured into securing our lives. They wanted it. All of it. And when I looked at my daughter again, she didn't flinch. If you don't sign, she said, still not meeting my eyes, then you won't see your grandchild grow up. Your choice, Mom. My breath caught in my throat. And somewhere, beneath the heartbreak, a new feeling began to stir. It was cold. It was clear. And it was done waiting to be disrespected. I reached into my purse, past my wallet, past the small photo of Rachel and David I always carried with me. My fingers found my phone. Mom, Rachel said, her voice unsure now, what are you doing? I didn't answer her. I just pressed a name. David picked up on the second ring. Hey, Mom, everything okay? I need you to come to Franco's right now. Yes, I know it's late. Just come. I ended the call and set the phone on the table next to the folder. I think, I said, keeping my eyes on Rachel, someone else should be part of this conversation. Silence. Not the silence of awkwardness. The silence of people who realize their plan isn't going as expected. Henry shifted in his seat, his carefully constructed smile beginning to crack. The lawyers exchanged glances the kind predators share when the prey starts fighting back. Mom, Rachel said, slipping into the pleading tone I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. There's no need to involve David. This is between us. Is it? Because when you bring 3 lawyers to dinner, I don't think it's just between mother and daughter. Richard Kirk cleared his throat. Mrs. McKinney, perhaps we should discuss this more privately. Family matters can get emotional. Can they? I said, locking eyes with him. How thoughtful of you to notice. David would need 20 minutes to get here. That gave me 20 minutes to hold the line. Henry leaned in, his charm turning back on like a faucet. Look, Mrs. McKinney, may I call you Elaine? You may not. You may call me Mrs. McKinney. That rattled him. Of course, Mrs. McKinney. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to help you manage your assets more efficiently. Maximize your returns. Position you well for the future. And how much would this help cost me? I'm sorry. Your help, managing my assets. What's your fee? The lawyer stiffened. Henry's jaw ticked just slightly. There would be some administrative costs, naturally, but really this is about family. About security for Rachel and the baby. The baby. I looked at Rachel. Tell me, when exactly did you start planning this? I don't know what you mean. When did you call the lawyers? Before or after you asked me to dinner? Does it matter? It matters to me. Fine, she snapped. We've been discussing options for weeks. Ever since you made it clear you don't care about my future. Options. That's what we're calling extortion now. It's not extortion. Rachel's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. It's family. This is what families do for each other. No. What families do, I said quietly, is show up without demands and without threats. A younger lawyer leaned in, nervous, green, probably still believed all of this was just business. Mrs. McKinney, you should know grandparents' rights in this state are very limited. If your daughter chooses to restrict access. Excuse me. The voice came from behind me. It was calm, even. But everyone turned. David stood there in his hospital scrubs, hair slightly mussed, ID badge still clipped to his collar. At 37, he carried his father's quiet intensity and my mother's sharp eyes, the kind that didn't miss much. I'm Dr. David McKinney, he said. I believe you called me, Mom. I did. Please have a seat. David sat down, nodded once at Henry, and then turned to me. What's going on? They want me to sign over power of attorney. Rachel says if I don't, I won't get to see my grandchild. David's jaw flexed, the way Harold's used to when something deeply offended his sense of right and wrong. He picked up the folder, flipped through it like a man reading a grocery list. Power of attorney. Mom, did you ask for help managing your finances? No. David closed the folder. Carter, Rachel, gentlemen, could I have a moment alone with my mother? Now hold on, Carter began, but David didn't raise his voice. I'm not asking. Something in his tone firm, final made even the attorneys pause. They stood, shuffling awkwardly toward the bar area. Don't make any hasty decisions, Richard Kirk called back. When they were gone, David leaned in. Talk to me, Mom. What's really happening here? For the first time that evening, I felt a strange rush of something I hadn't felt in months. Not fear, not anger. Relief. Because someone still saw me as a person, not a prize. They want control, I said, and if I don't give it, they'll cut me off from my grandchild. David was quiet, then, gently. Are you having any problems, Mom? Memory? Confusion? Last week, I caught an error in my property taxes and saved myself $800. Does that sound confused to you? No. It sounds like the woman who taught me to budget when I was 10, who paid off a mortgage alone, who got me through med school. He looked toward the bar. What happened to her, Mom? Mom! When did Rachel become someone I don't recognize? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing. This wasn't over. And I wasn't going down quietly. 3 weeks passed. Not a word from Rachel. Not a text, not a call, not even a forwarded photo of the nursery I'd helped her decorate months ago. But I didn't sit by the phone. I planted tomatoes, repainted my living room, replaced the curtains Harold had chosen with something light, something that let in more of the morning sun. I began living in my house again, not just existing in it. And every Thursday, like clockwork, my new neighbor Janet knocked on my door at 9 a.m., holding a casserole dish or a coffee thermos or a funny story about her 3 grandsons. We'd met 2 days after Franco's. She'd just moved into the duplex next door, after her own children had tried to pressure her into selling her home and moving in with them, not because she needed care but because they wanted the equity. Janet had said no. Firmly. Then she'd brought me blueberry muffins and said, I think we might understand each other. At 67, Janet had silver hair, eyes that didn't miss a lie, and the quiet confidence of someone who had learned the hard way how to set boundaries and not flinch. One morning, as we drank coffee together in my kitchen, she said, You know, Elaine, there's a group I heard about through the community center, for women like us, who've been targeted. It was the first time someone had said it out loud without judgment, without pity. I was intrigued. 2 weeks later, I sat in a modest room at the Meridian Community Center, surrounded by 12 folding chairs and stories that felt achingly familiar. A retired nurse whose son had tricked her into co-signing a second mortgage. A grandmother whose daughter forged her signature to drain her 401k. A woman my age who had been locked out of her own home by her daughter-in-law. The stories varied, but the ache underneath was the same. Grief. Not just for lost money but for the realization that someone you raised, someone you loved, had seen you not as a person, but as a resource. Louise, my lawyer from Franco Zeppa, was the one who had referred me. Turns out she volunteered there twice a month, helping women draft protective trusts, explaining legal options, quietly fighting a war most people didn't even know existed. She introduced me as a woman with a story worth hearing. I shared what had happened at Franco's. Not the whole thing? Just enough. The room went quiet when I described the folder. The ultimatum. The baby used as leverage. And then, for the first time since it all happened, I heard something I hadn't expected. Clapping. Not loud, just the sound of hands softly affirming that I had done something brave. That I had turned away from manipulation and walked toward my own power. After the meeting, a woman named Rosa came up to me and said, "I wish I'd brought my son to a restaurant full of lawyers. You had guts." It wasn't about guts. It was about survival. The next week, I went back. Then again the week after that. Not as someone needing support, but as someone who could offer it. And slowly, something began to change. I wasn't just recovering. I was rebuilding. Not the old life, no, that was gone. But a new life. One where I wasn't just someone's mother or widow or target. I was Elaine McKinney. Whole. Strong. And no longer afraid to be seen. It happened on a Wednesday. Janet was at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and flipping through the grocery circular when she looked up and said, softly, "Michael called." My breath caught. He said Rachel had the baby. Just like that, everything inside me paused. A granddaughter, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, healthy. They named her Eleanor. My mother's name. The message was clear. Rachel was reaching, trying to pull me back in with something sentimental. Something she thought I couldn't resist. "She asked if you'd like to visit," Janet added, carefully. "She said visiting hours are flexible, that she'd very much like to see you." I stared at my coffee cup, steam curling upward like a question I didn't know how to answer. Part of me ached to go. To see the baby. To hold that tiny bundle of possibility and forget the past 6 months. But I'd learned to examine those instincts. Because sometimes love and guilt can look too much alike. "What do you think she wants?" I asked. Janet didn't flinch. "I think she wants to use that baby to reopen negotiations about the trust." I nodded. The truth always sounded clearer when spoken aloud. That afternoon, I called Louise. "I've been expecting this call," she said. "I want to meet my granddaughter," I told her. "But I want to do it on my terms, with clear boundaries. No manipulation." Louise didn't hesitate. "Then we'll create a plan. Supervised visits. Michael can be present. No discussion of the trust. No room for pressure. And if she refuses, then I'll know where I stand." Later that evening, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I would very much like to meet Eleanor and have a relationship with her as she grows. However, any contact between us must respect the boundaries I've set for my own well-being. I am willing to visit with Eleanor in Michael's presence for limited periods. Any attempt to discuss the trust, my financial decisions, or past grievances will end the visit immediately. If you can accept these terms, please have Michael arrange our first meeting. If you cannot, I hope you'll reconsider when you are ready to prioritize Eleanor's relationship with her grandmother over your relationship with my money. I will always love the daughter you were. But I am no longer available to be victimized by the person you've chosen to become. With hope for your growth. And boundaries for my protection. Mom. I sealed the envelope before I could soften a single word. Then I walked it to the mailbox with the steady calm of a woman who had finally learned where love ends and self-respect begins. 6 months after that night at Franco's, I stood in the main hall of the Meridian Community Center. 12 women and 3 men were arranging chairs in a circle, their voices low, their movements deliberate. This was our weekly group, Survivors of Financial Exploitation by Family. We came from different backgrounds, different towns, different stories. But we all carried the same bruise in our hearts. At 72, Maxine Makowski moved like a woman with purpose. Rosa Pratt Kelly, only 60 but worn down by her son's gambling debts, carefully placed tissues on the center table. Janet settled beside me, her chair now unofficially hers. She had started coming 3 weeks after I did, under the excuse of curiosity, but I knew the truth. She came for me. At the door, a new woman stood clutching her purse like a shield. Mid-50s, hair perfect, but shoulders stiff with tension. First time I whispered to Janet, "I'll talk to her after." These past months had shown me just how many ways people can be taken advantage of. I'd heard stories of forged signatures, reverse mortgages, credit card theft, and the slow, aching realization that someone you loved had seen you only as a bank. But I'd also seen something else. Rebuilding. And not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that grows like moss after a forest fire. Louise had become something of a legend around here, helping people reclaim stolen assets, prosecute abusers, set up trusts. As the group quieted, I stood. Good evening, everyone. For our newcomers, I'm Elaine McKinney. This is our space, a place to be honest, to grieve, and to grow. Tonight's topic: what comes next? After you've set your boundaries, after you've said no, after the dust settles, what do you build? For me, I said, it was purpose. For 40 years, my purpose was being a wife and mother. After Harold passed, I thought it was about preserving what we built. But now, I think it's something else entirely. Helping other women protect what they've built. Helping them stand their ground. Helping them see that surviving betrayal is not the end of their story but the beginning of their strength. Around the circle, heads nodded. Sheila, who'd refused to forgive her son for stealing her identity. Eddie, who had chosen solitude over toxicity. Carolyn, who had filed her first police report at 74. Then, the new woman spoke. How do you stop missing who they used to be? Her voice shook, and for a moment we all held our breath. You don't, I said gently. You mourn them. Even while they're still alive, you learn to love the memory without letting it control your present. When the meeting ended, Janet walked home with me in the cool night air. How do you feel? She asked. I paused. Solid, I said. Rooted. Like I finally know who I am without needing to be needed. The burgundy dress still hung in my closet. But now, it wasn't a reminder of who I used to be. It was just a dress. And I was someone new. Someone who had rewritten the story. On her own terms. In her own voice.